there. Welcome to Hollywood Breakthrough. I'm your host, Danielle Tillis. Hi, this is Danielle Tillis with Hollywood Breakthrough. And today we have a great guest today. We have Lorenz Grant on, and I want to say thank you for coming on the show. You were the Emmy Award winner. You did Jesse Owens' story and also Freedom Writers. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Danielle. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You have an amazing journey. I read somewhere that you actually are a newspaper writer. Is that correct?
Yes, that is true. I am a trained journalist, I guess would be the formal title.
And so how did that all happen when you decided to do from that transition to films?
Yes, I studied journalism at Northwestern, and I loved writing. I always loved writing, and even writing little plays when I was little. So writing was definitely a journey I hoped to, my lifelong dream, and I really wanted to be a foreign correspondent. I was read when I was little. I always admired Langston Hughes and even Ernest Hemingway and their reports from the front lines during the Spanish Civil War, that long ago, but I was very captivated by that sort of first-person account writing, while bombs are going off and trying to hide in a hotel room, and even the camaraderie among the journalists. But I didn't pay attention to the fact that it was pretty much a boys' club. And when it's time for my dream, as I'm thinking of it, I certainly studied, I wrote at newspapers, but, going out on interviews, it became quite clear that the dream of becoming a foreign correspondent, there just really weren't that many people of color who had foreign posts with major newspapers, much less women of color. And I was just raised to go for it, and I was very impatient. And I think, when you're young, you just cannot fathom no. And that really stuck with me. So I wrote, and I actually found a job in reporting and editing, actually in English, in Mexico City. And I hightailed it down to Latin America. I was in Europe for a little while right after, graduating, and then came back and went to Latin America and found this job as an editor. My parents were actually terrified that I was leaving the country again and going to a place where I really didn't know the language. But I was just so, impetuous, as well as, a chip on the shoulder, and went anyway. I ended up studying Spanish language and literature down in Mexico, based in Mexico City, and I learned Spanish, and I actually became quite good at reporting in Spanish. Then I ended up freelancing for quite a few American publications, from Newsweek to some San Francisco papers, and even the Fort Worth Star-Telegram in Texas. And from there, I got a posting in Panama with Reuters. And so then I was really reporting for a wire service and got such an incredible experience in terms of writing, in terms of meeting, greeting, discussing, interviewing world leaders. I tried to cover women and women's issues as best I can, issues that I thought would be interesting to different types of readers. When I came back to the United States, I was, I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm ready for action. The documentary world was exploding at that time. I just wanted to keep writing and telling these stories in a different way, and I kind of felt like the next step was the screen. But then how do you go from the printed page, if you will, or electronic page as a wire service to the screen? And with the documentary world exploding, that seemed to be the perfect time to make that transition.
Right.
Sort of storytelling with images. I got a job at a production company and worked my way up. Since I was already a journalist and used to reporting and writing and talking on the phone, they found that to be a great asset. So my being, having to talk to people all the time and having to interview people, particularly difficult sources, because sometimes world leaders don't want to answer a question, particularly if it's about some sort of unrest or civil dispute or even murder charges, etc.
Right.
So I think that tenacity, as well as those skill sets, being able to really concentrate and deliver a job in very unusual, sometimes circumstances, I think those skills translated over well to documentary.
Right. And what drew on you to Jesse Owens' story? What made you do that particular piece?
When I switched over to documentary, it was interesting how I fell into the historical documentary realm. Since I was good at researching and finding hidden archival images or archival film footage, that's how I ended up in the path, I guess, if you will, of the genre of historical documentary filmmaking. when I directed Jesse Owens, that really came out of the excitement and popularity, if you will, of the documentary Freedom Riders. I had produced that with Stanley Nelson before Jesse Owens, and PBS and American Experience, they realized they hadn't really done a full documentary treatment of Jesse Owens, and the Olympics were coming up, and they felt like that was the perfect time to do it. And I lobbied for the opportunity to direct the documentary. I really thought it would be a very exciting challenge to mix kind of politics, geopolitics, culture, race, and sport all in one film. And that was the draw for me, and that's why I lobbied very, very, very strongly for the opportunity to direct the documentary.
I think what's so great about what you've done is that you kind of made your own path. You didn't have someone that you kind of went to say, hey, I have this film or have this idea. You just kind of you didn't wait for anyone to kind of give you permission to do this. You just kind of went for it. How hard was that for you to do? And what was some of the issues you came across to actually doing it? The obstacles you had to go through?
Yes. It sounds so cliche that it's really hard and there's so many obstacles, but there really are. And maybe understanding that from the beginning, that's sort of the playing field, maybe that helps me get through it, perhaps. You're going to have a lot of no's before you get a yes. And sometimes the no's aren't even personal. It's just there's no space, there's no opportunity, there's no opening, there's no budget. There's a whole host of other situations that can be going on that precede you. And so even I think as a minority or a person of color trying to break into whichever industry, but since this happens to be the film or documentary or media industry, now it's such a crowded landscape that you really do need to figure out how to set yourself apart, how to stand out. And the hardest, even harder than that, is how do you get opportunities so you can, stand out and set yourself apart. I think for myself personally, perhaps the initial advantage was journalism. So, I became a foreign correspondent through my own way. I didn't wait to be, crowned foreign correspondent. So at least I got that opportunity. And then coming into the documentary space, I did not have any documentary or film experience. I didn't study film. So I knew I had to really offer something unique, as well as if I got the opportunity, I was going to really have to study up, and become just as good, if not better, than my peers and those that did study the field. So when I came to the table with, okay, no, I don't have film experience, but I can write, I can research, I can call people, I can book, I can, land interviews because I can prove it with all of my articles. Okay, so that's my advantage. But then, okay, how do you set up a shoot? You better figure it out because, no one's going to stop and take time to help you. So what did I do? I basically, now you can go online. You can go online or go to the library and read and view all these documentaries. Before I guess it was called binge watching, that's what I did. I binge watched. I watched all the documentary masters, or many of them, from the Maisels brothers to Pennebaker to, of course, Stanley Nelson to Barbara Koppel, the woman who won a Oscar in the 1970s. There's French filmmakers, there's American filmmakers. There's so many people to watch. So the advantage is there's so many tools that are out there now that you don't really need so much money to study. And there's certainly so many documentary books. But I think first things first, watch. Now you have different genres to watch, reality versus occupation-type documentaries versus historical documentaries versus contemporary documentaries versus observational. So I think anyone who wants to try and break into this business, you're really going to have to do your homework. And I would really recommend that, because otherwise, how else are you going to stand apart? And once you've done your homework, then try and get access to any one of those filmmakers or production companies that do one of those genres, to get skilled in it, to decide if you even like it. And then you need to decide, what do you like? Because I think, it's okay to kind of find a genre or a space that speaks to you, because there's just so many choices. You're going to need to narrow it down at some point. I think that's a little bit of how my journey occurred.
When you did your own research, how to get started, what are some of the things you kind of ran across that you wanted to learn how to do?
Right. I think the basic one thing, when my first shoots that I went on when I first started, I asked the camera guy a lot of questions. What camera are you using? What are you shooting on? What frame rate? When you go out on a shoot for these particular projects, they do have a set of statistics or basic requirements that you must deliver to the broadcaster. So they're going to have some of those things already decided. But you can certainly gain more intel, as I call it, by talking to your crew, talk to your camera guy, talk to your sound person, what frequencies are you using, what equipment, how do you get it, what do you do, how do you set it up, why are you setting up here versus there. A lot of it you have to look and view, and you're on set or however you can find a safe person to ask. That's where you try and use it and educate yourself all the time. I love talking to DPs now we're cinematographers, because they're always on the front lines of the latest thing, because they have to be. So it's exciting. What are they shooting with now? What looks good? How do you get depth of field? What is depth of field? So a lot of that stuff, one person really does need to figure that out and decide that. And each client, if you're working for a client, they have their own preference and look. Certainly in the PBS world, and the American Experience in particular series, they love what they call the filmic look. They want the films to look rich and film-like, even if we're not shooting on film. And so they do have specific parameters. And then talking to people and looking at enough films, you can see the difference of how, if you're just, doing a verite shoot and you're following someone inside and outside of a building versus someone, a more set up and composed shot, those are going to aesthetically look different. And those are different aesthetic needs. So I think the key is to figure out what are the different aesthetic choices that are available, but also what is suitable for the subject matter that you're working with. When I switched over into the PBS landscape, they really do have a very, I would say, fine-tuned or very sophisticated look that they like, and they find it more enjoyable for the viewer and viewing experience, but it also is not distracting if your background isn't all, crazy, for lack of a bad term. So I think those are some of the homework that doesn't ever go away, but if you're really getting started, that's some of the basics you're really going to need to know, from, what's your key light, your fill light, just the 3 basic lighting, scenarios, to something much more complex and rich in terms of what are you shooting on, from a Sony to a Panasonic, what are the difference between those, and what are the frame rates and all that stuff. And now that we're so digital, there's just so many technicalities that are out there that, you can know enough of the language to, help yourself from not getting burned on the project, but also just to keep up to know how to communicate with your post-production staff on what needs to be delivered and how it should look, and keeping track along the way to make sure, you are on that path, delivering the finished product in a hopefully beautiful as well as entertaining way.
What made you keep going? That you had some obstacles. What made you say, I'm just going to keep going with this? Because a lot of people might have stopped and said, this is too hard. I'm just going to do something else. What made you kind of like, I'm going to keep going? I get a lot of no's, but I'm going to keep going. There's something inside of you that told you I'm going to keep doing this. So what was that? What were you telling yourself, I guess?
Right. That is a good question, because sometimes, I do wonder that often, why am I doing this to myself? I mean, especially starting out, when you move to a new city, much less try and get into an industry, at one point my dad gave me good advice, like to keep all your rejection letters. And I actually did. And, at first you're just so crushed, you're thinking, why do I want to keep this? This is so depressing.
Right.
But, and then the folder, especially when the folder gets really large. And if you need another one,
oh, no.
But that is the point. I mean, then you can look back on that and go, aha, they rejected me. Or now I'm working with them. Because I think, again, it's hard to see in the short term, the benefit, or maybe that isn't the right place, or maybe they just weren't staffing up, because a lot, especially in the media business, things change so rapidly. Sometimes one time a small company, they may get a commission and suddenly they need to staff up, for a series. And then that's how you can get on. And that's how I ended up getting on working in the cable sphere, because the company just exploded. They got like a bunch of commissions for some series, and they needed to staff up, and they needed different types of skill sets, people to just like log footage, to people to like, okay, we need somebody who can like get on the phone and like find stuff, and then we need somebody to write stuff, and then we need the director, so they kind of have a system on how they staff up, but usually those decisions don't come until they get the green light. And we certainly know in this industry, it's really hard to get the green light. But if you're not even in the company, you're still trying to break down the door. It's so hard to get frustrated, and it's really hard to motivate yourself. I mean, I would recommend, surround yourself with, if not, family or friends or close sources that you can confide in, maybe get tips, but I would say more just confide in, because sometimes you do need that boost of like, you know what, you can do it, just keep going, keep at it, because it helps to have that motivation, because you can only, look in the mirror every morning and go, okay, you can do it, mm-hmm. And, just to have that extra boost, because it really is tough. When I moved to New York, I mean, I saw 25 or 30 people before I got a yes, I mean, it's just not going to be easy. The sort of the best and worst one possibly could say about this industry is there is no one path. So it's not like you must, like an attorney, like you must go to law school and you must pass the bar before you could even be, considered for a position in a law firm, much less make partner, right? Well, in media, it's just anything goes, which is great, because then you can kind of figure out how to get yourself in. But it's also sometimes incredibly frustrating, because there's so many people trying to do the same thing. And if you're, the child of someone very connected or famous, or, who knows, you just happen to be best friends with somebody who owns a company, then, those people, they're always going to be there first. I mean, that's just, so I would recommend stop focusing on that group, because that's just that group. That's always going to be there, no matter what industry you're in. So if, instead of trying to keep up with the Joneses, focus on what you really can do. And really, one can physically call people, email people, stay in touch with people, try and stay on, the radar, and offer yourself to work for free. That is like the worst thing to do, but sometimes it's the easiest way to get in a company. People will always take some free help, but then also we do have to live and have an income. So I would certainly recommend trying to get in somewhere any way you can, and then find a job. If both of them are paying, then that's fantastic, but sometimes it's not. So figure out how you can subsist where you are with whatever kind of job you can have. Meanwhile, try and figure out how you can gain some experience, from student films to corporate films to NGO films to documentaries to shorts to long form. Now so many people are doing so many types of things that really all one needs is experience. And any kind of experience is really helpful, whether it's a short or long, because you're getting experience and you're getting around those people and you're getting to hear the language, and you're getting to see how the etiquette is on a production set, the etiquette in a production company, what is the rhythm of a shoot and a show, a schedule. So those are some things that you do need to figure out and learn, but I think there's different ways that you can do it. And I mean, I would say that's how to keep going, because it's just not going to be easy. There's always that person who seemed to have tried once and they got hired right away and they got a great job and they got a great salary and then they're on to awards. There's always, the grass always seems greener on the other side. So just focus a little less on that and focus more on yourself.
Now, we talk a little bit about Freedom Riders, but we kind of didn't mention a little bit, but it's an Emmy Award-winning, Peabody Award-winning film that you've done. How has that changed your life? Because that movie also was in The Butler. Parts of the clips was having that done in 2010 and now being used in the Lee Daniels film, The Butler. How was that doing something that far along and then also being used, a couple years later?
Right. That is just such an incredible journey. One I could have never predicted. I'm still sometimes pinching myself, because I remember being on, every minute was just painstaking work. It was a documentary on 1961, which means trying to find archival imagery was really, really challenging. The quote-unquote civil rights movement wasn't even called such in 1961. It's much later, 63 and beyond, after the March on Washington, one could say. So just that whole year and a half process was just really tough trying to excavate and find, it seems like we kept finding one shot in one state and another second of a shot in another state and another second of a shot in another country. Mm-hmm. And then we kind of put it all together in the edit room. It just didn't seem to come easily, like just tons of boatloads of stuff and there you are. I mean, it certainly was really rewarding, but we could have never imagined the outcome. And so once we, got through and delivered the film, we premiered at Sundance. So that was probably the first inkling of what we had. And I even think they were probably one of the first audiences. I mean, we literally sort of finished just at the end of the year and, shipped the tape and were screening in the mid-January. And from there, we did, we got some press out of that, and then we did a limited theatrical through the DocuWeeks program. And then, a famous writer, I think it was Stanley Crouch or someone, saw the documentary through that process and got the film somehow to Oprah. And then from there, she ended up making a show out of the Freedom Riders. For the audience, studio audience, they were Freedom Riders. So literally her show and her resources flew every Freedom Rider in that they could find and could travel. And if they needed assistance or health aides, they brought them too and made them the entire audience. And we assisted them with some of the graphics and photos, for the documentary. She interviewed a couple, pinnacle people who were in the Freedom Rider movement. And then from there, since of course she was eventually in The Butler, they were filming The Butler, then they got in touch with PBS and then our production company, and then I just liaised a bit to help them find some people that they wanted to, some scenes that they wanted to clear for the feature film. So it was just this incredible journey that we could have just never, ever imagined. And then, in terms of social impact, I mean, I think even people in the Middle East asked for, copies of Freedom Riders, the film screen in China, in the United States. Young people have seen it, so that was just something we, really, really could not have imagined at all.
And Sundance was that your first festival you ever actually did?
For Freedom Riders, I was at Sundance once before, more as a coordinating producer on the documentary The Murder of Emmett Till in the early 2000s. So that was the first time there, but it was much more low-key. I was, just sort of starting out. It was my first film in PBS. And then years later, the second time was actually Freedom Riders. And by then, I was the producer. I had worked on lots more documentaries. I had co-produced 2 4-hour specials for PBS and then produced Freedom Riders, and so that was the first time to be on that kind of platform as a producer of a feature-length documentary. So that was an enormous just career boost, perhaps, but also just an emotional high, and I was just really, really mostly grateful and thankful and excited for the Freedom Riders, to finally get their due, if you will. They kind of got lost amidst all the civil rights movements. And, one of them joked to me and said, "My goodness, now you're acting like we're rock stars, but, I'm 75 and everyone wants to fly me all over the place." Oh, go, So I'm happy that they're finally getting their moment, and they certainly are too, but, they are kind of chuckling like, okay, well, 50 years later, now you're calling me,
But that's so great, though, because I think every time is it true that every time someone see an image of the Freedom Riders, is it really your work that's being done? Is that your work usually?
Wow, I never thought of it that way.
Because I see a lot of different things. You see like images,
right.
It's usually kind of the same type or same image. I'm like, is that the same image that you've done? I mean, are they just contacting you and say, hey, you know what, we're going to use this image for this particular movie, this 3 minutes or 2 minutes, or is it always your film or your work?
Well, to credit Eyes on the Prize, that groundbreaking series, they did include the Freedom Riders in their series. I think that was in the 80s, and that is now available on the DVD. But I guess certainly our film was the most recent. It's the only documentary that's like a feature-length documentary specifically dedicated to the Freedom Rides and the Freedom Riders. And public, television, part of their mission really is to make films available. They do want people to be able to see them. So it certainly could be. I never even thought of it in that landscape. But, the film is available on the PBS website. You can certainly see it, free streaming. You can even purchase it. They do want teachers to, view it and use it. But, obviously the archival imagery, now that we've kind of excavated it and listed all the sources at the end of the documentary, people on their own, if that's what they're doing, they can certainly contact those sources themselves.
And get the information.
Right, and get the information or images.
Because you did all this work. And obviously it was very hard for someone to do it because no one else had done it. And you were able to do it. And I list all this information now. Now it's out there. What I'm going to do with it next. And the fact that someone like Oprah Winfrey saw it and did a whole show on it. And then in hindsight, she said, you know what, we're doing this movie called The Butler, and we're going to use some of these images as well. Talk about a fast movement of just blessings right behind that. And that seems so amazing that happened, you know, and this is like what maybe your second or third film you really did yourself, or is that true?
Around that, I guess so. In real time, it seems quite slow to me. But looking back, now that it's occurred, I mean, when you're in the midst of making it, you just feel like, you're literally, sometimes, they talk about the glamour of filmmaking or the glamour of documentary filmmaking anyway, and sometimes it feels like you're watching paint dry because, every nugget is, there's so much effort exerted into finding it, verifying it, etc. But yes, once Freedom Writers got out there, and then before The Butler came out, or I should say they contacted us, by then we had won the 3 Primetime Emmy, so that gave us some more boost, and that was, some people came up to us quietly and just said it was just really spectacular just to see, people of color winning such, really preeminent awards, because there's not very many of us in the industry, and there's not very many who are in it perhaps on that level. There are certainly other people, obviously, but it really is a notion to sort of get your films funded, much less completed, much less out there, much less on that level of the playing field. So that really was quite spectacular. And, I can't even speak to the Oprah effect. It's just, is that the Oprah effect? You just don't know.
You hear that people say the Oprah effect's like, does that really exist? Is it really true? And you're like a living proof of that. It's like, yeah, it did happen. I letting this happen to me.
Right. I mean, I just got to be in the same room with her. It's not like I got to meet her and have brunch, but certainly she, saw what I worked on, and it went from there. And the funny thing is, we never thought something was going to happen, because the office called several times trying to say they wanted to do something about Freedom Writers. And then they would call and they would vanish and call and vanish. And so we just thought, okay, this is just, it's never going to happen. That's fine. We'll keep going. And, maybe they were just trying to figure out what exactly to do, what kind of a show. But, once they figured it out, it was really amazing. It was just great to see all the Freedom Writers, and they were really pleased and just too thrilled to be able to see, someone with those kinds of resources, how they used it to that, on that level. And I thought that was really, really, certainly gracious of her, but really interesting. And it was one of those shows that was part of her last season.
Right. I remember.
Right. And so many Freedom Writers hadn't even seen each other.
Nice.
And, many people haven't seen each other, literally almost 50 years. They did the Freedom Ride, and that was it. Or they never met. They just knew of each other because, of course, we have to remember back then there was just 2 phone lines, as I remind, college kids or high school kids. There was, they did the Freedom Rides with 2 phone lines. So if they can do all that with 2 phone lines, you guys with all your social media, Twitter, et cetera, you can make much better use of, your technological advancements to help improve, your lives, your community. So, yeah, some people just got to meet either Diane Nash for the first time. They knew who she was, of course. They may have spoken to her, but maybe they never got to meet her, or they had heard of other people, because everybody was on the ride at a different time. People weren't necessarily in jail at the same time, or they weren't necessarily cellmates. So, and then they did the Freedom Ride. Some people stayed activists. Some people just did that and then went on and did other things in their lives. And then, life takes over. And, 40, 50 years later, they've been doing something totally different. So, yeah, that was really quite incredible.
And the first one you did, we talked about it briefly, was the murder of Emmett Till, a coordinator and producer for that one.
Yes. And so that was my sort of first switch from doing a lot of cable kind of crime spree shows to wanting to see what it was like to work on that landscape. What is this PBS landscape, and working with these types of filmmakers? What is that? What's the difference? What is it like? And, just the detail of the work and the production length, it's just a different set. It's just very different. And so I just wanted to experience that. And so, I just sort of really took the bull by the horns and knocked on a zillion different doors and said, can anybody give me a chance? Whatever credit you give me. By then I had even directed a couple, of these sort of cable shows, but I, swallowed my pride and took one could say a credit cut because I was just determined, if this is what I have to do to break in, then fine. Okay. So that's, some of the things one can think about when they're trying to break in. You could be, I've had attorneys who've come and just offered pro bono free just to come in and work in our production office just to see what it's like to be in a production experience, but they're attorneys and they're thinking of switching over. But how do you do that? And clearly they're used to being a salaried attorney, not an intern.
Mm-hmm.
But, everyone figures out, you need to figure out your will and your way of what you can muster and do. The other route is one can get very, very lucky and have a project and write a grant and get it all funded, and then you're off on your way. And there are many people that happen to. It's just the odds of that, especially now in this crowded landscape, are just really tough. You spend a lot of your time raising funds for whatever you're trying to work on, become known as a director. But then in the meantime, how do you support yourself unless you're, independently wealthy or somebody else is supporting you? And if that's not the case, then you need to figure out how to support yourself. So in my case, I thought it would be beneficial to support myself with my work by being in the industry and working for whomever I could work with. And that was my thinking. I want opportunity. I want to keep learning. I work with men directors, women directors, whomever. And I certainly did that, at the station or in a production house, in your house or in an office, however, those are some of the decisions you'll have to make along the way.
Is it pretty easy to get funding for things? Because you said you wrote grants as well. So for your films mostly, are you getting grants or are you raising funds?
I think it's both. I think it's really, really, really tough, particularly since we've had some of these economic cycles. And I think more established filmmakers, sometimes they have it, quote unquote, easier because they've got their reputation and they've got films to prove that they can actually produce a film. First-time filmmakers, sometimes it's harder because you have to prove not only can you make the film, but then how do we know you know how to spend the money that you can actually deliver a finished product? So I think all of that goes into play. There are some people who just got really lucky and I certainly know them, and they just did, their first, time out up at bat, and they wrote a grant and just got $100,000, and they were on their way. Other people like myself, I've raised, $5,000, $10,000 or $40,000 here or there over the, it's kind of spread out, but you'd have to sustain yourself in the meantime. And what does one do? Some people just concentrate on their own film that they're raising and work in an unrelated industry, either waiting tables, like maybe the restaurant industry, because you have more flexible hours, or they work in offices because then they can have daytime hours and then it's fixed and they can use the evenings for their project. So I think, each person has to maybe figure that out for themselves, what is best, because it's going to be hard. Filmmakers have told me, like, if you really want to be in this game and you really want to direct your own project and from the ground up, think that you're going to have to be committed for at least 5 years. Give yourself an average of 5 years to, write it, raise the money, get a trailer done, get a rough cut done, all those steps as an average. Sometimes people, it happens shorter time, some people longer. I was like so incredulous. I thought, oh, that's silly. That can't be that long. But it really is that long. I myself have been working on other indie documentary while I've been doing these other films. So doing these other films has certainly distracted me, but it's like you just have to do everything. There just isn't any easy path that it's just 9 to 5, you do this, and then your film's finished. It's day, it's night, it's weekend, sometimes it's holiday time, sometimes it's giving up, going out or hanging out with your friends or brunch or something, because you either got to get a grant proposal out or you need to edit with your own project, or however, you need to, figure that out.
Now, are you taking advantage of any tax credits in your state?
That is interesting. That's something that needs to be better explored, because in the documentary landscape, it doesn't really seem to translate over the same. Possibly because maybe with the funding structure, you're not necessarily using actors and all the different unions. You don't necessarily have perhaps such a long, chunk designated of shoot days. But I do think that somehow, I feel like the documentary world has not explored with the various film commissions, particularly in New York, which has such a very aggressive and involved film network and very supportive of the independent industry, that the tax credits either don't seem to apply or just very mildly, like only if the company is set up somehow in some sort of nonprofit, then maybe they don't get sales tax, but, in this sense of percentages off, that doesn't seem to work, possibly because of the funding structure. Because if you're receiving a grant, maybe that is some of the financial small print that maybe doesn't apply. So there really is something different in that financial structure and tax packages with, say, the narrative or feature film space and the documentary space.
Would you move to a different city that has possibly a higher tax credit for doc films to do the work? Or would you pretty much do all your films in New York?
I would say that's a great question. I know of people in the narrative space who have done that because one advantage you have of doing a feature film is you've got a script, you've got characters, and you just have a set determined amount of shoot days. So if you just need to, I know people, for example, they just moved their whole production to Michigan, when they had that tax break, and certainly or California or upstate New York, but then they come back to wherever their home base is, and then they can edit their film. With a documentary, it's not necessarily so. Depending on your subject, if you're doing a verite piece, possibly because you're moving around, but then you may be following your subject, not necessarily your tax incentive. Like if, your subject is in one state and then he goes across the country or around the world, that could, maybe perhaps complicate things. But I think I wish I was more of an expert on that because I feel like there's some other incentives that we could take more advantage of that either possibly we're not doing so or we just need a different dialogue so may help people understand of what we do and that actually maybe more documentaries could actually qualify for some of those.
Right. Now, another question I had, you did a short, Voice of a New Generation. That was a short you did. How easy is it to do a short and do a full film doc? How is it different transition for you to write or to manage? How does that work?
Depends on the day. When I'm in my class, have full day. Oh, it's just, just part of the creative process and it's exciting. When my day is, I'm having a darker day and the glass is totally empty, I'm just like, this is a nightmare. This is so hard. Well, my intention is to turn the short, Rokia, Voice of a New Generation, which is a profile of the singer from Mali, West Africa, Rokia Traore, and all of her efforts to really improve women's position in West African countries like Mali through her music. She's really an advocate for women's rights through music. And I wanted to follow a woman subject. I wanted to do an African topic. And because to me, I felt like that was sort of the perfect transition from the civil rights movement. Like this is the next civil rights movement, that younger generation in many of these African countries who really are ready to move their country to the next step and the next level, but of course are either sidelined or, if not directly interrupted by many corrupt governments. So I wanted to explore what is it like to have a woman who's taking charge and actually trying to make a difference in her own country, use her as a microcosm of this voice of a new generation. So I was able to, put together the short. I certainly thought I would have had tons more funding earlier, but I certainly won't complain because I was able to raise funds through various PBS and state art councils. So you do have to be very enterprising where you look for grants. Also, I thought it was a natural fit having a young woman who, is of African descent but lives in both Africa and Europe, that sort of cross-cultural dynamic, because I feel like so many young people of today's generation have that connection. Either their parents are from somewhere else and they now live in the States, or they're from somewhere else and live in the States. But I feel like so many more people who have, what you would call literally a bicultural experience. But convincing more traditional funders of that, they're still more stuck in like, well, how does Africa speak to the America? I think obviously it does in a big way, particularly since we have so many more residents from so many different countries.
Right.
So that's the goal and the job of the filmmaker, to do that sales pitch and to do that convincing. So I don't know. I think it's easier, quote unquote, in a short, in that you can get something accomplished and finished and out there and use that as your calling card, either to make that particular film itself a longer film, or to show, look, I have done something. This is sort of how I think as a creative director, and I'm ready for the next project. And you can use it as a next project, because everything you do need, it's very much a show and tell industry. People want to know, what have you done? What can you do? And can I see it? People really just aren't going to get excited by some words on a page, no money at you. That's just really, really just having high expectations.
The Jesse Owens film you did, how hard and difficult was that to find footage for that particular film?
That is a great question. At one point I thought, oh, well, it may not be so bad. Then I thought, you know what? This is a 75-year-old story.
Right.
It's going to be impossible. I'm going to have to do tons of recreations or evocative shooting. So I literally explored trying to film in different track stadiums. And then, of course, I, would have had to film in a stadium that had the same type of track from the 1930s, which, as you can imagine, there are not many left. All stadiums look different. But once we started digging, it was really incredible, the rich treasure trove of footage we found, a lot of footage from Europe. And then once I realized it was the Olympics, it's an international sport, of course, so then many countries did filming. So certainly you have, Germany was the host of the games, and certainly Third Reich and the German industry at that time filmed all the games. Like, that was the whole point. They wanted to put really their whole nation and Aryan beliefs on the map, and they felt the best way to do that was to film everything. So, and because a lot of it's in Germany, a lot of it was just in really, really great condition. And then there were other sources in the United States who took footage. And there were a lot of private collectors because, interesting, a lot of people actually attended the games. That was like a big deal for some people who were wealthy or not maybe the same wealth that we think today, like doctors. Like, there was, for example, a doctor from the South in the United States who knew of Jesse Owens and wanted to go and did some filming from the stand. So some of the camera work isn't great, but meaning there were a lot of different interesting and unique finds of archival finds out there. A lot of people who took footage from the stand. Some people were just too high up that you really couldn't see the event. And as a director, when I was doing the film, certainly, you know who your principal characters are going to be. But then once I kept looking at the footage, I just realized, wow, this could be really fantastic. Like, the crowd actually is a character. So to me, I thought that would be another exciting element to actually make the crowd almost another character in the games and in the film. Through Hitler's point of view, he was trying to use the crowd to his advantage.
Right.
But really, it ended up being the crowd is just like any crowd in some ways. They were just so caught up in the excitement of the games, the moment, the pageantry. But then seeing Jesse Owens, they had never seen anything like that. So I wanted to spotlight that, and I thought that would be a unique use of that kind of footage, since there was so much home movie-type footage taken from the stands.
Are you doing all the editing and all the research yourself, majority of the time?
I have a team. Like, the team for Freedom Writers was larger than Jesse Owens. So I had associate producer Stacey Holman, who helped me lead through the charge of the research. And then we had a part-time archival researcher, and we also worked with the German production company, since they spoke German, to kind of in a co-production kind of part-time way to help us navigate some of those German-speaking archive houses. But it was up to me to sort of tell people, okay, what do you want us to look for? What do you want us to find? Give me some direction, give me some clues. So that was really my responsibility as the director. And then I had an editor, a great editor, Algernon Tunsil, who edited the film. And, kudos to him because, he saw the sunrise more than I did. I mean, I know the hours were incredibly long, and we pumped that film out quite quickly and just, burned the midnight oil a lot to get that film accomplished.
So what is your process when you're looking at doing a film, a short or documentary? What is, your process when you think about how you want to get started?
I think the first thing to do is, whether it's, contemporary subject or a historical subject, what is your subject and what is your takeaway? I want to do a film about this. So I could say, okay, I'm doing a film about Jesse Owens. Well, what else? Because I think in today's landscape, and to make better stories, you want more layers. Like, more than one layer really, I would argue, separates a subject from a good film. Subject, Jesse Owens, good subject. But then what is going to make it a good film? Well, hopefully you can add the layers of, here is the son of a sharecropper about to have a big showdown, in Hitler's Nazi Germany, as well as, okay, what is like when we have these sports heroes and icons during an era of abject segregation in the 1930s. All those different layers. What is a sports hero and an icon? How do we use and then toss away in some ways these icons? What do we as society, how do we even treat our sports icons? And in a way, we're not quite kind to them. We use them when they're convenient, and then when we don't need them anymore, okay, well, we're done with you for right now. So those are some of the extra elements I thought about to try and add into the film. So the more sort of story layers or takeaway layers you can include in your film, I think it just makes for a more richer viewing experience and a richer film. And then to do all of that, you need to write it out somehow. You need to put it in some sort of treatment form, literally, what's Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, or 5 acts, or however you're going to structure it. I do think you need to think in that storytelling way, like a good novel or a good movie, even if it's, from feature film. You need those plot points. What's going to make you hopefully be on the edge of your seat, what may make you a bit sad, what may make you a bit angry, and then what is your overall takeaway. So I think those are some of the perhaps common elements I like to think about when I'm tackling documentary film.
What you're doing right now at PBS, Jesse Owens, Freedom Writers, and Emergent Emmett Till, we're all underneath the American experience for PBS. Was that relationship you had with them? Was that an easier relationship to start once you got one recognition for the one film? Is that relationship a lot easier to keep going back to because you've been so successful with them?
That's a great question. It's certainly, I would have never known. I wasn't setting out specifically for that, but it ended up happening that way because that particular series, I mean, it's one of probably the nation's pinnacle history series, and they pride themselves on trying to bring historical subjects to life, and us as filmmakers, that's really our task. And it ended up happening that, oh, wow, I'm working for PBS, and it turns out I'm in this American Experience series landscape. So, and I, really love being in that space because they are historical topics. It's like almost like an ego to challenge myself. How can I make this story that's 50 years old come to life? Okay, now how can I make this story that's 75 years old come to life? And can I keep you engaged and riveted? I think they really pride themselves on story. And so if you go and do something else like maybe contemporary, you really are thinking about story a lot more because sometimes people get, I don't want to say lazy, maybe that's not fair, but when you're doing a contemporary subject, you just film and film and film ad nauseum. So many people do much more filming than thinking sometimes that they think the story will just magically come together in the edit room. Well, it doesn't. I mean, magic happens in the edit room, yes, but you really have to sort of have some plan for that magic, and then even more magical things unfold. So, in answering the question about PBS American Experience, I think, once they get to know you and your filmmaking and your level and depth of research and historical care and an ability to find things, I do think they appreciate that and have a idea of what they're going to get, and then, of course, have a high expectation of that. So certainly for me, coming off of Freedom Writers, that was just like the biggest, I guess, stress ever. Like 3 Primetime Emmys, Stanley Nelson directed it. Okay, now I'm directing it. It's right after Freedom Writers, and it's like, okay, so what are you going to bring to the table? And I'm just like, okay, I just cannot have a nervous breakdown right now. Mm-hmm. So that was basically the charge. Okay, nervous breakdown, X. No time.
Wow.
So I really, my God, I felt the pressure and the weight, literally, and I'm sure that's why I was working till sunrise all the time. But, I did sometimes have to separate that because if I just concentrated on that, the weight and the expectation, then the film would have suffered, I felt. That's when you just have to say, okay, we're doing this now, this is happening, come hell high water, this has to happen. I had a lot of production interns. They were super great. Came in, worked for free. They all each gave like 2 days a week, and they, I didn't lose any of them because they were there doing real stuff, learning. We had to catalog and database all of the archival materials. That's how we sort of internally I keep track of stuff. So you could have thousands of elements coming in, flying in via email, via the mail, via FedEx, DHL. You got to keep track of it all. So you can find it and think and hopefully create something. So I think that's really, the added maybe pressure or the added challenge of doing these historical films. Not only just the filmmaking and the storytelling and working with these, and this canon of all these amazing filmmakers that PBS and American Experience expects, but then now you got all this historical archive stuff you got to keep track of. So, how do you structure your production so things are hopefully organized well enough that you can find stuff to tell your story? I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yeah. Is it easier now, though, than it was, a couple of years ago? Because everything's so internet-based, you can find things a little bit quicker. Is it harder or is it easier now because the access of it?
That is an excellent question. I would say a little of both. It's easier in the sense of there's so much more stuff that's digitized, which is fantastic. Like when we worked on the murder of Emmett Till, there was hardly anything on the internet. I couldn't find these photos. You would call an archive house and they would, ship you actual photos.
Wow.
The flip side is now it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to verify the provenance of stuff. We have to be very careful. And then, of course, when you are having interns or just anybody working with you, you just really have to stress, okay, Wikipedia or that blog or website, that is not the end-all be-all of your fact check.
Okay.
So in some ways, you really still have to be very careful because people just say all kinds of stuff, post all kinds of stuff on the internet. And I think hopefully that experience tells you to keep digging and to keep asking questions. Okay, what is that? Where is that photo from? Do they really own the film? Are they the, purveyors of the film? Do they just borrow it? You have to do that extra legwork. So I think the initial research to kind of get stuff out there, get stuff found, get your proposals and your thoughts and your stuff together. I think in that way it's much easier, which is great because then you can actually physically see images. You can see the moving footage out there. You can have an idea like, okay, this is really going to work. This is going to be rich. I can find stuff. And then you can kind of do a lot of your maybe initial proposal writing for that. So I think it's great for that. But then when you really get into the nitty-gritty, you still kind of need that old school combination of actually the internet, but then, I need to go to the library. And it was amazing with some of these interns who had never been before,
Oh.
in a library.
Oh no.
So that is part of the good and bad, and to be clear on, okay, if you're going to the library, this is what I need you to do, what I need you to uncover, how it needs to look, it needs to be readable, legible, all those things. So I would say it's a beauty and blessing and sometimes a curse because you also have to spend so much time sorting through silliness on the internet, and separating rumor and gossip from what really occurred. So you do have to be, careful about that.
So what are you doing right now? What do you have that's coming up that you've been working on?
Thank you. Yes, I'm still trying to keep busy. I am in rough cut on my indie documentary on Rokia, Voice of a New Generation, so I'm very excited about that. Working with my editor. So I'm hoping that I can, finally get that out the door soon. So I'm also finishing up, back wearing now my producer hat, on a 2-hour documentary on the history of the Black Panther Party for PBS. And so I'm working in with Stanley Nelson on that film, and hopefully that should be finished soon as well.
And why did you choose the Black Panthers? What was that that made you pick that particular film or that work you want to do on it?
Because I'm insane. No. My joke, like all my friends who know me that I worked with these films are like, wow, you're finally working in the present tense. Ha ha ha.
Oh.
Like late 60s and 70s. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's, fascinating to, spend time where, everything pretty much is in color, versus there's some color certainly in the 30s and the early 60s, but, hit or miss. This to me, I don't know. I think for me personally, maybe it's like full circle of maybe the civil rights-ish experience or freedom fighting experience in the United States. This was the next chapter after exploring other civil rights movements, nonviolent resistance movements. No one has really dared to try and do a feature-length doc on the Black Panthers and that era and that time and what was going on, that where revolution was in the air all over the world. What did that mean? What did that look like? So I think that is certainly proving to be the ultimate challenge, and I guess hopefully we'll rise to the challenge when the film is finished.
Right, and so you decided to do that particular piece because you haven't seen a lot out there, but I mean, there's been other Black Panthers films out there a little bit.
Yes, there have been on either different aspects or highlighting a particular chapter or highlighting a particular few leaders. So best stab at to do that and a little more, what was happening all around the world in a way of, putting that whole era into a context, a historical time frame. So that's the big challenge.
Is to put everything in a time frame.
Yes, because I think before people are sort of familiar with many of the players of, Kennedy or Johnson administrations, different acts were passed from voting rights, Brown v. Board, March on Washington. Some of those would have now become seminal, or seminal moments in civil rights history. But I don't know if once you get into the later 60s and 70s, if it's such the same way because it's just so explosive. It's just so different for so many people. You have, plus we're at war in that era where, Vietnam is the backdrop. So, I think it's, going to be somewhat different even visually, what it was like from that late 60s to the 70s, that time frame. Everything was almost, kaleidoscope, chroma-color, then, just from the fashion to even the issues. So, hopefully you viewing the film, one can feel like they're back in that time, what was going on that really does set it apart from a different period than, say, a few years ago. Like I was talking to someone who said they felt like from 1963 to the 66, 7, or 8, even though it was a few years, it just felt like a whole different generation. For those people growing up then, they felt like those few years was just like a time warp. Like that was just such a different experience for those people. So we'll see. So that's that's our challenge, how to put all that into 2 hours.
And it's going to be easy for you to, or maybe difficult to find some of the members and try to interview them as well?
That's the direction we're going to go in. Certainly what I'm used to doing, calling people up out of the middle of nowhere and asking them questions on what did they do, 50 or more years ago. So that's sort of my, par for the course. But yes, we definitely want to talk to people who were involved back then. What was it like? Where I love what I call the 360-degree eyewitness approach to historical storytelling. That's what I like trying to do, or what I call it, from the eyes, ears, nose, mouth, the whole 5 senses. And the best way you can do that is to get as many people who were there as possible. And then you certainly have a few historians or authors or writers to help, move the story along, but also provide some additional context.
And you're doing this basically for PBS. You're not trying to put this into like festivals or things like that.
Well, this is slightly different. This is more independent. It will be PBS, but it's going to air on the independent series, Independent Lens. So there are plans to see how we do film festival circuit, and also we can do the theatrical in some sort of way. So we definitely want to try and do something a little different than a similar model that before.
And the other one you just talk about, the Rokia Voice of New Generation. So that's something you're working on as well. Are you trying to do the same thing with that, or is this going to be a little bit different?
For my documentary, Rokia, Voice of a New Generation, that plan will be somewhat similar in that it will have a PBS broadcast, but a different series. It's a series that spotlights sort of pop culture, African pop culture, and what's going on there and how it speaks to U.S. audiences. And that series is called Afropop. So it'll have a place there, and I certainly hope to see what will happen in the film festival world. And as for theatrical, I'm not sure. I've talked to some people who were interested in possibly packaging, either some music docs together or world music docs together. But the landscape of, audience demand changes. Now Africa's back, quote unquote, Africa's back hot again. Music is back hot again. So we'll see. But I certainly would love to see how much, attention that I can get out there. The National Black Programming Consortium has been, one of my funders, along with the New York State Council of the Arts and Jerome and private investors. They have been supportive, and I'll just go from there and hope to see. I certainly will love film festival, the broadcast, and then we'll see if what goes on beyond that.
What do you think the time frame would be done with both of these, you're thinking?
End of 2014 for completion, and then that's when we'll start, depending on when what festivals one gets in, then you go from there. Then you lay out, do you get into any of the winter festivals, or will it be the summer festivals, etc. So that's usually how that happens. With Panthers, is a little bit more structured because it'll be certainly finish the film. There's the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Black Panther Party coming up, so will the broadcast be timed around that or not? That's something they're playing with. So basically to target completion of both films end of 2014, and in 2015, seeing them either in a theater near you or a film festival near you.
Wow. Okay. That is great. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We have learned so much about your past and your journey. Great insight. Quick question though. If someone, listening to this and they're trying to get to not necessarily your level, but just trying to find a path, what is some advice you have to a younger generation that's trying to get into this type of, documentary films?
Well, certainly never give up. It sounds so cliche, but you will have so many easy opportunities to give up. You will hear no a lot. And that's up to you to decide, can you take it? I would even think of it like, are you trying to be an actor? You're going to have no so much before you're selected for a particular role. But I think the difference is now we have a little bit more control, if you will, of our social media. We can generate our own audiences. You can find a niche. And if you're studying, let's say you're in college now, I would really if you really want to do film, then I would come out with another unrelated major, even something like business, MBA, or law, or just something so then you yourself can have more agency to navigate from the contracts that you'll need to sign through your career, through how to generate and create unique funding sources. The world is now, we've so gone global, it's small. You can get a funder from, Asia to down the street, which is a great thing. So I would say be armed with those tools so you can, really accomplish your mission. If you want to have a film completed and distributed and out there, then you really need to be armed with the tools to do so. And if you're in college, I would recommend getting another degree, because then you could at least have other contacts and sources on how to do that. If you're just switching gears from one career to another and you want to get into the film industry, I don't know if I would recommend going to school to study film, because there's just so much out there that you can learn on the job. You can learn in a production company, you can learn in a commercial studio, you can learn on a film set. There's so many different avenues that you can take, and there's all kinds of film courses that can, you can bone up on how to operate a camera in a day or 6 weeks. So I would just look at what resources are available to you in your town in front of you, take advantage of those, and map out a time frame. I want to either be interning within 6 weeks, I want to be on the payroll within a year or 2 years, I want to be, in this kind of trajectory, either producing track or directing track within 1, 2 years or 18 months. I would, map it out for yourself and really be true to that time frame, because as we've seen, the market often tanks, and then we're all thrown in a tailspin. And, hold true to your time frame. If you come up to your deadline and it really hasn't quite happened for you in the way that you want, then maybe give it a rest, go back to the career that you left and give that another try, because then maybe you can combine both of your skills. Like, who knows, I worked on medical documentaries about different types of cancer treatments. So, there's so many ways you can merge media and bringing media storytelling skills to so many different types of subjects and careers that I just wouldn't be closed. I would be very open-minded on where and how that could be used.
And when someone does something like a small film or a doc, and how do you suggest them just pull it out there? You just saying like put it out there on a YouTube, or if they can't get funding, just kind of distribute it somewhere and just keep pushing information out there? It doesn't matter what city you're in, if you're in a small town, things like that?
Sometimes, we like to discount either. I'm from a small town, so I'm going to speak for small towns, because,
okay.
You can be in a large city, but everybody's in New York, everybody's in LA.
Right.
And it's, that adage, do you want to be a small fish in a big pond or vice versa? And I think if you're not from in a huge city and you're in a small town or you're in a medium-sized town, I would not discount the resources where you are, because one great thing is there are film festivals almost everywhere. If you're in the Midwest, for example, there's quite a few recognized film festivals just in the Midwest. The True Falls, that's like one of the big ones now, the best ones. I think that's in Missouri. There's the Midwest Film Festival, I think that's out of Chicago. Of course, Chicago International Film Festival, that's still, I think they claim the world's oldest film festival. Not to mention so many universities have either film festivals or film collectives. So I would work on building up your network. Sometimes it's even better to be from a place that's outside of the New Yorks and the LAs, because then you can build up your own network. I would, use all kinds of crowd sourcing as well as social media to generate your own screenings. If you have something that's already finished, have some screenings, but, build your own word of mouth through Twitter, through your Facebook, have people friend you, either have screenings at a university, have screenings, if you're in a theater, you don't want to necessarily spend money for that, but maybe you can pair the subject of your film with either a course or professor or something at a university, or even a local business. If your film is on food, well, is there a local restaurant? You can somehow make a connection. If your film is on science or sports, is there something at a university, or if it's medical theme, can you pair with a hospital or a clinic or a doctor? So I think, just write down your list. Don't, throw the baby out with the bathwater and think, oh, well, I just have to move to New York or LA. That can come. But, once you get to those big cities, then you better be ready, because you're basically going to be competing with the Ken Burns of the world and the Scorsese's of the world and, if you want me of the world, So get your own, because if you come with something, then that puts you on the map in a different way, and don't even say even if it's a short, because short filmmaking really is a skill in itself. To tell a really moving, good story in a short amount of time, that is a skill set. And there's so many short film festivals, just screen shorts. I would apply to just as many as you can afford. Sundance really recognizes short filmmakers. They treat them like, as they should be, the A-listers. They get to meet Robert Redford just like the feature and documentary directors do. So I would look wherever you are, get a list of all your local film festivals, then just get a list of all film festivals and just apply, because, you may even get invited to, who knows, somewhere in Poland, or, Warsaw has a film festival, Helsinki has a film festival, Greece has one. I mean, there's so many, and there's so many film festivals that have themes, the LGBT theme, the women theme, the sport theme, the environment theme. Now there's so many niche out there that you can actually explore and even exploit them. So, explore what is your subject of your short about, and then try and find some similar themes to tie into, and then you're off and running, and then start hosting some screenings, apply to the film festivals, and then you're just building up your reputation to get fun, and then when you get out there, have your next idea ready. What do you want to do next? So once you start having a screening or on a film festival or wherever, because that's going to be the next question. So what are you doing next? Don't use that opportunity to say hem and haw and go, well, I'm exploring several things. We all are. Have something ready to say. So I would say that's some of the advice I would give.
Wow, that's great. Thank you so much. And both the films, Freedom Riders and also the Jesse Owens, can be seen and showcased at the American Experience, which is at pbs.org, a site where they can pull up the site and actually watch online, or I think purchases the actual DVD as well on their site. Is that correct?
Yes. Freedom Riders is still streaming free, I believe, on the PBS American Experience website. Jesse Owens is no longer streaming free, but you can access it through iTunes. I think it's just 99 cents. Amazon Prime, Hulu Plus, even Netflix. So the film is definitely out there. You can certainly go to the PBS website and buy a DVD if you wish. And it's, and it's screening and licensed in Europe and even Latin America and even in the Middle East.
Okay. Lorenz Grant, Emmy Award winner. You did Jesse Owens' story and also Freedom Riders. Thank you so much for coming on Hollywood Breakthrough. We definitely appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And you can follow me on Twitter at Lorenz